Welcome to Diagnosing Dx, the podcast giving diagnostics the platform it deserves. While therapeutics and devices often take center stage, diagnostics is the engine driving precision medicine. I'm your host, David Philby, and each week we spotlight the innovators, breakthroughs, and real-world challenges shaping the future of DX. In this episode of Diagnosing Dx, I'm joined by Harald Steltzer, CEO of OrisDX, a company tackling one of the most overlooked failures in diagnostics, how we detect head and neck cancer. We discuss why the standard of care hasn't changed in a century, why dentistry is actually the front line for early detection, and how OrisDX is building a diagnostic that removes friction for clinicians while improving patient outcomes. This is a masterclass in purpose-driven diagnostics and smart go-to-market execution in early-stage DX. Welcome, Harald, to the show this week. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. And yourself?
Very, very good. Thank you. I'm excited to have you on the show. We've got an interesting topic. The stuff that OrisDX are doing is some really, really interesting stuff. But I think when we spoke, there's more about how you guys are also going to marketing, educating patients, which is one of the hottest topics I hear from early stage founders and C-suite about how even when they've got great science, great products, how do we get it into healthcare systems? How do we educate patients? So important. And I just remember when you and I spoke about the need to do this show, that really stuck out to me about how you guys have got a really interesting plan on how you educate patients and put it into their visibility. So I'm excited to get into that. Before we do that, I think what's really important is if you could introduce yourself and your background, who are you, where you've come from, and what you're doing now.
Sure. My name's Harald Steltzer. I'm the CEO of OrisDX. I spent 20 years with big companies working at the lab bench. So my background's in biochemistry and genetics. I worked for companies like Abbott Laboratories, the joint venture with Takeda called TAP. I'm all here in the Chicago area. Moved on to more program management, to corporate development with companies like Schwartz Pharma and Genzyme. Ultimately helped with the sale of Genzyme to Sanofi about 10 years ago. And the last 10 years have been exclusively new business building and venture creation with a combination of venture capital and private equity.
Wow. What was your first company in terms of like the startup world? What was the first company you were involved in?
That's a great question. Way back when, I came from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they had one of the first contracts from the NIH for the Human Genome Initiative. And while there, I worked on my first startup as a undergraduate, working for a professor that was coming up with the first sequencing software. DNA Star in Madison, Wisconsin still exists to this day. That was founded by Fred Blattner. I've been hooked ever since. New product development, deep tech, new product development, and been hooked for 30 years on it.
That's awesome. And so how did your roles progress within startups when you first entered that world? What were the sort of roles you were doing, up until what you're doing now?
Yeah. And so honestly, I had my first role as a startup while I was an undergraduate, and it was just doing basic bench work.
Yeah.
File manipulation, DNA sequencing, and putting it all together. And this is the early days of understanding how to make the human genome at scale. I went on and spent 20 years in a corporate world. Interestingly enough, there was a word that I learned after I left the corporate world that was called an entrepreneur. And so I was that entrepreneur in a big company that they call an entrepreneur in order to help understand and do product development. And so it started out with some clever techniques on bench chemistry that needed to migrate between instruments at Abbott Laboratories, eventually got into different types of program management, product building, market launches, conferences, conference planning, touch points with patient flows, how to access patients. And so I've worked a little bit across the whole ecosystem through reimbursement to get a better sense of how do you bring and elevate a new product and bring it into market. always looking for new ways of innovating the existing business models, whether it's going direct to patients, whether it is clever techniques for distribution of product through sales channels that people have used in the past and trying to make them look a little bit different in order to accommodate new technologies that are becoming available. A lot of tech is going into remote monitoring and trying to figure out how to manage that in this new ecosystem that we have. And the last piece is really starting to think about, what do you wrap around a product? What types of digital health services are going to be needed? Library
Yeah.
diaries are needed. And how do you connect patients and families with one another in order to help them share their stories and elevate their understanding of how to treat diseases?
Yeah, interesting. Digital health and the technology around things is playing such a big part at the moment. We're also seeing the AI revolution in precision medicine and the ability to diagnose really early in large data sets that's just having a profound impact on. Actually, I would say precision medicine is one of the industries that has seen one of the most proof of concepts from the AI revolution than many, which is super interesting. Um, you've done quite a lot of the startup world and the big corp world. Um, do you think that sort of that combined experience sets you up uniquely and gives you really strong foundations to be an early stage CEO in what is, diagnostics is a tough industry. It's not like we have incredible tailwinds behind us that allow companies just to, the rate of success in diagnostic startups is unfortunately not very strong, but you've got a unique experience that you can bring to the table.
Well, again, I think, well, fortunately, it's what I enjoy doing. I've always liked working with the small teams at big companies, or finding partnerships with smaller companies to
Mm.
work on. That has always been interesting to me. So it wasn't a big leap. What I found most helpful, though, is the respect that you get on how to navigate corporate teams. Startups are built in order to get sold to bigger companies, either the whole thing or in bits and pieces along the way based on the platform that they're developing. And so having the understanding of how big companies, the sponsorship within those companies for early stage startups, where to find the capital within big companies, or how to find the right
Mm.
people to, again, continue championing and navigating you through uh, their assessment of your technology. In the early days, it's largely just conversational. Do you think you'd be interested in a technology like this? If so, what do you need to see? Do you want to get involved? How do you want to get involved? And so I found it easy to, well, I think I found it's a great way of kind of, I'm out over 50. What do you do when you're over 50? You try to figure out ways of what do you know how to do, give back a little bit. And I found a lot of joy in being able to run a company, advise other companies, advise funds that are investing in companies just like mine, to be able to really start to make a difference. And it's a world of constrained resources, and diagnostics has always been constrained to some degree. Big platforms working in hospital systems, then smaller boxes to work in hospital systems. How do you get things that are really complicated to patients? Next gen sequencing is a great opportunity. That's never going to be so small that you can do it chairside. So what are you going to do? Come up with the easiest possible tool for sampling in order to get that into a core sequencing lab, and then provide services around it that make it easy to accommodate in a remote setting, whether it's a home setting, a dental office that we're learning how to bring the laboratory developed test into, leveraging next gen sequencing. So it winds up being an interesting way of putting a lot of different resources and networks together to continue to innovate. Therein lies a bit of the challenge right now, is how do you get reimbursed for those innovations? Can you get reimbursed for one test or a panel of tests? It's a moving target right now. And I
Mm.
think we're all trying to, do that in slightly different ways. For me, I'm trying to bring a laboratory developed test for head and neck cancer, leveraging next generation sequencing into dental offices where primarily the first touch point for patients is during a dental exam by a hygienist, and they're in the mouth and they see something suspicious lesion. How do you do that? It had to be really, really simple. It had to be less scary. It had to be um, appropriate for the environment that you find yourself in. And interestingly enough, on the way, we made it easy enough to be done both in a clinic and then worked closely with Colgate's team to come up with the instructions so that the instructions, if we send it into a home, can easily be accommodated in a more remote setting, whether it's the home or remote clinic.
Wow. Let's start to unpack this then Harold, because it's really interesting stuff what you've got. So who are OrisDX? What's the test, and how did it come about?
Yeah, so it probably started 20 years ago. A team at Johns Hopkins that was doing the first generation of blood-based liquid biopsies did a really good job at putting some of the first tests onto the market. Foundation Medicine comes to mind, and a number of others. What they learned how to do was look for small pieces of DNA and assess whether or not there was cancer developing. Interestingly enough, if you were to take a sample of blood and look for head and neck cancer, you can't see it. By the time it's really bad and gets invasive, it's already pretty painful and it's started to grow in. For those early tests, you're looking for other types of sampling mechanisms. And one group and Stan Lapidus did a great job 20 years ago in saying, hey, for colorectal cancer, let's look at stool samples. And 20 years later, we've got a company, Exact Sciences, that is absolutely crushing it in that modality. And
Mm.
so that team, interesting enough, had one of their team members was an assistant professor of head neck surgery, um, Dr. Nishan Agarwal. He was hired by the University of Chicago Medical Center to be chief. And he said, I want to figure out how to bring a solution like I've done with blood in the past and bring that to the salivary matrix. And so they created the foundational science around looking for cancer biomarkers in the salivary matrix. And to make a long story short, it took about 10 years, a lot of NIH dollars and V Capital dollars and others to say we've got the right 7 biomarkers, put a patent around it. Now we need to bring it to market. It's working for us in our laboratory setting at the University of Chicago. How do we unleash it to the world? And so it's a salivary rinse that you put in 9 milliliters of saline into the oral cavity. You rinse it. The sample kit comes like this, can be sent to any clinic. Uh, in it, you're going to find that saline. You're also going to find a collection system so that when you expectorate the saline, it goes into a wide mouth funnel that's with a 50 milliliter Falcon tube. And then we put a preservative into that. Then we seal it up and we send it to our central lab. The central lab does very deep sequencing, whole exome panel. And then we have a robust pipeline, essentially an algorithm of steps that is able to parse out and look for the somatic mutations, cancer-causing somatic mutations within the DNA itself, which are the shed cells off of the tumor.
This is fascinating. Why head and neck cancer specifically was this pursued? What's the sort of difference? Because it's not a cancer that we often talk about. It's not widely publicized in terms of the challenges with it. Everyone knows the sort of big topics in oncology, but head and neck cancer seems sort of lives in the shadows a little bit. And why is it so important to bring a test forward for this at the moment?
Yeah, there's two things that jump out at me when you ask that question. One is the current standard of care is visual inspection. So the same way that we're identifying head and neck cancer for lesions in the oral cavity 100 years ago is the same standard of care in the guidelines today.
Wow.
So if you couple that with the frustration of a surgeon that's seeing the worst cases, in the Midwest and sometimes the country, it's become University of Chicago Medical Center has become a destination hospital for very aggressive cancer in the head and neck because they've got some experimental therapy programs. Imagine having to do surgery where you're taking tongue, you're taking jaw, you're taking lymph nodes, you're taking bits of your soft tissue.
Mm.
It's an horribly invasive surgery, and it's disfiguring. He was frustrated that he had to put his skill sets to do that. These patients have a dramatically different quality of life after these events, and if caught early as a stage 1 or 2 cancer, a lesion, if you do a $2,000 surgical excision of the lesion, you're cured. It starts on the mucosal lining, and you can largely get rid of it through a simple surgical procedure. And he goes, Harold, I'd rather do 100 of those simple surgical procedures instead of doing one long day of, taking the cancer out and reconstructing somebody's face. And I go, let's figure out how to do that. And so, knock on wood, we're going to be launching it in the first quarter of 2026 and unleash this test for everybody to use.
That's awesome. I'm always amazed when I talk to um, novel diagnostics companies bringing a new test to market about how far advanced it is compared to the standard of care, and how backwards the standard of care seems, that we're still so far back. And I say this a lot on the show, I genuinely think the common person walking down the street genuinely believes that if they were to ever get cancer of any type, it would just be found, it would be easy, and they would be treated. But actually, the standard of care and the way these things are diagnosed is so far back from where people can't even comprehend that actually when they find it, there's a high chance that it's very late stage cancer, and therefore what has to happen then is so much more significant than anything that could be done if we were to catch things early. It's baffling that, what you're saying is what we're bringing to market compared to what currently exists. Crazy to hear these things.
Yeah, and I think therein lies the frustration of the community as I have conversations with whether it's a dentist, an oral surgeon, a hygienist, even the payers that are dental players and medical payers alike. It's really saying we need to figure out how to come together and elevate a product like this. It's finally, the cost of sequencing has just dramatically come down. So
Yeah.
shout out to Illumina and their team for making the cost of running these tests at a commercial level outside of R&D and precision targeting of drugs and patients. It's now come down enough that we can treat it as manufacturing. They're setting up manufacturing centers with businesses that their only job is to figure out how to do library creation on microfluidics and then run it on different trays and different machines. And they've
Mm.
brought that cost down in such a way that we can offer it now, and it's getting paid for these services. We're wanting to better understand not just early diagnostics, but whether or not drug therapies are working. Are these
Mm.
expensive advanced therapies working? Is radiation working? Are we getting, outside of having tumor reduction on scans? That's good to have, but what if it's still sending off? What if it's still growing? And there's markers for that. And so we're getting much better at figuring out how to titre in the right dose of one drug, two drugs, three drugs, a little chemo, little radiation in order to try to knock it back. And we're using these products now to help with that decision making, which is just increasing from a patient standpoint. If I take less drug, um, not this drug, that's not working, less chemo, all of this can get titered in so that it's not
Yeah.
just precision diagnostic, but it's paired with interventional
Mm.
tools that can also be used in a very precise way. And so while we can use our test, day one, it's going to be set up for determining how, is a lesion cancerous? And again, we picked a clever name, oral lesion. We're testing whether or not the lesion is, benign or not. and then we're able to, what we can also do is to work alongside volumetric mass. We can turn our qualitative test into a more quantitative test. That's part of the life cycle plan that we have. And so we're designing our tests to do what's most critical right now. Lesion is cancer, not cancer, but it can be used in a more quantitative approach. One of the pieces that we identified through our market research is only about 21% of dentists have the ability to do medical payments. They're used to happy and healthy visits, not visits that are talking about head and neck cancer. Again, head and neck cancer is the sixth most common kind of cancer, just a few percentage points off of colorectal cancer. So I'd
Right.
say we're getting to it. We're getting to it as researchers and clinicians and entrepreneurs trying to figure out how to get there. And so we built this patient health navigator to wrap around the product itself to just take off some of the friction points that we identified during our market research.
So I'm going to touch on this because I think that's super interesting. But I wanted to ask this: when when did you guys decide a great way to bring this to market and to get it into the eyes of the right people and ultimately the patients who need this test? When did you decide that going into the dental offices was the right way to do it? I know, obviously, now hindsight and hearing you say it, it sounds obvious, but it's not obvious that, diagnostics companies don't always know the right way to get it into the right healthcare systems and make these mistakes
Yeah.
and fail because of it. But you guys seem to have found a really clever way to utilize existing systems that, it goes hand in hand with.
Yeah, and this is where the primary market research really plays into it. You talk to oral surgeons, do the surgery, and if you talk to enough of them, you can develop a pattern. That pattern is, where are you getting referrals? That's the question that we ask. Where are you getting referrals from? And they say nearly all the time it is coming from dental clinics. So
Okay.
while it can be detected at an emergency room, it can be detected in a primary care, it can be detected at a dermatologist where they're doing kind of a slow top to bottom scan of your body looking for cancers on your skin. The majority of the time it comes from a dental clinic. And so therein lie the decision making for starting to approach, how do we get it into dentists? Talking with dentists, what does it need to look like? What are you concerned with by having, access to a test like this? And we've slowly worked through, the codes that are necessary. Again, there's a whole set of medical procedure codes that are called CDTs, managed by dental insurance, and another group by the AMA for procedural codes. And as a result, we had to come up with a blend. The nice part, the easy part for us, is that it was really one test, one indication, largely one way to start thinking about reimbursement. And so we put all of our effort into making that as easy as possible. And if we ran into a piece of friction along the way, we tried to come up with an approach that would make it a little bit easier. Whether it's, a telehealth visit or teledental visit, and they're looking in your mouth and they're like, how does your teeth look? And all that. That's concerning when the light's in it. We designed the kit to be able to send into a home through a telehealth visit, whether it's a teledentistry visit or a telemedicine visit. Um, and then they wanted to understand, well, make sure you get it, send it to a central lab, make it easy. So creating a portal where you can have the shared experience to help navigate the patient, the provider, and the payer, and the final test results, so that everybody sees it as easy, largely easy to consume, and delighting them
Mm.
all along the way.
Were you met with much hesitation when you first started approaching dental clinics? Was there concerns about them having, or I guess what were them? Because obviously you've addressed a few of them and you're trying to make it easy for them. But was there an objective hesitation of, oh, hang on, what's this test we're now responsible for?
Yeah, so I'm a medical guy, and I was asked to bring medical clinical medical oncology solutions into a dental setting. So it's all new learning for me, which has been kind of fun.
Yeah.
The dentists are incredible entrepreneurs. They run their business very differently than a primary care physician. The insurances run very differently between them. And as a result, their incentives are just a little bit different, very clever, very entrepreneurial. And so they want to make sure that they understand and this is, they want to do good care. Don't get me wrong. They want to make sure
Mm,
that they're using latest technologies, and they're wanting to do this in such a way that that doesn't take up a lot of their time. There's fewer and fewer dentists, more and more people showing up for
mm,
getting oral health checks, dental checks, hygiene checks, and they're trying to make their lives a little bit easier. And so they have to make a decision on what products to bring in based on, well, how much time is it going to take for me and my
right.
staff in order to use?
Right.
And, therein lies they have to pick and choose what they're going to do based on how much they're going to get paid for that procedure. We didn't have
Mm,
an option in our case to do a box top, or a unit that can sit on the top of a unit. There's not, next gen sequencing isn't going to be used in that way. Illumina at scale, low cost is always going to be done on a really big box and done in
mm,
big batches. And so we needed to make the box easy to get. One of the tricks that we did is the same one that Exact Sciences uses. Well, we'll give it to you for free. No charge for the box. Just keep it on your shelf. When you need it, pull it off. That's completely different than what they're used to doing. Distributors, you buy product, you live on a margin, you sell it to the dentist lives on that margin when he sells it to somebody else. And so we had to figure out how to use the existing distribution system, but almost reverse engineer it so that we could give something free to a distributor who could give it free to a dental office. That's a little bit different. And so what we did is as we one way of making it easy. So as we ran into these challenges, we tried to come up with a pathway that would allow it to be just provide less friction for them in using it. And so they have a procedure code now for collecting the sample, 2 minutes to collect the sample, which is, they said that's fine. We've got the patients for 30 minutes. We can add 2 minutes in if we see a suspicious lesion. That's not going to disrupt our workflow, getting into the next patient. And then the rest of it is really on the patient is empowered now to start learning about the product, put in information into the portal, and the reward for that is they're going to be notified the instant that the test result is available. Also, the dentist will be made available. If they have a primary care doc, the primary care doc will be made available and aware of the test. And so we've tried to just make it easy, leveraging tools that other companies have come up with, and we're just piecing it together for our specific application.
that's awesome. You've mentioned the digital side of the product in this portal. So talk me through that, because it sounds like it's a really important part of the whole user experience, whether that's the dental clinic or whether that's the end patient. Talk us through what the digital side of the business is doing and the purpose.
Yeah, it really starts with making sure that each one of these has a code on it. That code gets put into our portal. In the portal, you're able to pile in the information. And so whether it's getting sampled at a home or a clinic, the information can come in. And that's really important for our laboratory information management system and tracking, right? We want this product and this sample to connect with this patient in a one-on-one way, and
Mm,
then we just keep adding value to it. So what we do is if you've got medical insurance, great. Let's figure out how to get medical insurance to cover it. If you don't, we've got the ability to do charge harder. If you want more frequent interval testing, because you're a high-risk patient. You've already had head and neck cancer, and you're more susceptible to it, and you'd rather spend a couple $100 on a test than go in and take time off of work to have it checked on by an oral surgeon. So we're coming up with as many ways as possible to make it as convenient as possible to use. That sample winds up going into the central lab for testing, and so we're able to get the report off of the DNA itself through our panel and the pipeline assessment, and we're able to connect the other pieces with regards to care and intervention. And one of the big pieces that we heard when we did our research was a lot of patients were getting lost in referral from dentist to oral surgeon. It's a lesion that doesn't hurt, it's not bleeding, I'll let it go. I got to take time off work, I don't want to do it, that sort of thing. And so what we wound up figuring out is that if our test is positive, right, you tend to get more inclined to take the next step in your care process. Not, I suspect it's cancer,
Mm,
but it is cancer. Then what do you do?
mm,
And so it's starting to help navigate that patient into a local oral surgeon. And so we call our patient health a patient navigator. We're trying to navigate the patient to good care, understanding the disease, reimbursement, and navigation to the next step. If it is positive, what do you do? How do you find an oral surgeon? What to expect when you see the oral surgeon? Who's your oral surgeon? What are the questions are they going to ask? All of this can be readily implemented in a digital interface to make the whole user experience, patient experience, a little bit less scary and a little bit more obvious. That's one of the hardest pieces in care right now is I got something. Where do I go next? What do I do next? Who do I see next? Who does that well? Am I going to, if I, do I trust them? How do I trust them?
mm.
All of this can be done in a little bit more meaningful way by simple connectivity tools in a digital platform.
That's awesome. That's awesome that you're doing that end-to-end patient hand holding that encourages more patients to go forward from the point they get the box, but also once they get diagnosis in terms of support thereafter. Um, you mentioned the frequency of the test there. What does the frequency look like of how often should somebody get this test who has no previous diagnosis? Um, I'll reveal my age. I'm 40, so how often would I be getting this test? Do I get it with my regular dental clean and checkup every year, or how do you think it looks?
Yeah, we get it's a great question. We get it asked quite a bit because people are getting, have some understanding of pap smears and
Yeah,
when and how often it's getting done. Breast exams, how often, when's it getting done, colorectal screening, how often. For us, the biggest unmet need is I see a visible lesion. And
right.
so if you see a lesion, we want our tests to be done. That
Yeah,
said, if you've survived head and neck cancer, and there's about 430,000 people in the United States today that have survived head and neck cancer, that's the highest level of risk. They're going in every quarter, every 6 months to an oral surgeon and getting assessed. I could envision a situation where save the oral surgeon some time, save payers some money from going in, sending our test out to that individual. And then at the frequency level is probably based on is this your second time that you think you may have it, third time or 10th time that you may have oral cancer? And decision making is going to have to be done, and none of those guidelines don't exist right now. From a screening perspective, that's really interesting. And so we could screen everybody as often as they want, as often as payers allow it to be done, particularly if you're in higher risk categories. There's a growing number of 20 and 30-year-olds that are not smokers, not drinkers, who typically associate with head and neck cancer. And they don't have HPV, so that virus also causes head and neck cancer in the oral cavity. Why is that happening? We just don't quite know. And
mm,
so that's why we're looking for a rather broad indication over 18 to begin with. The frequency of it is going to have to be risk stratified, and we don't know where that's going to be. I'd say, if it's something that you're concerned about and you afford it, you do as much testing as you think you need. Not too different than I'm going to have these comprehensive panel cancer test done, or I'm going to have my body, my body scanned because I feel like I'm a high risk based on my profile, my family history. Uh, we don't know the answer to that. It's going to be an interesting one on our journey to start as is the lesion cancer or not? And then we're going to go more broadly. What we're hoping that the test can do, and again, there's not a drug you can take or a mouth rinse that you can get rid of the cancer. It's a surgical procedure. If the
Yeah.
surgeon can't see where the cancer is, where do you go? And so
Mm,
if it comes back positive because we've identified cancer, but we can't see the lesion, then you get into a watch and wait. And there's some really interesting tools that are becoming available that you can do at the home that snap on to your phone. I've got a good friend running a company at Grin, and they'll put a scope on the end of your phone. You put it into your mouth, you look around your mouth with the light on, and you can easily get a quick assessment, a visual assessment of whether or not the lesion is presented. So if we found it, but we don't know where it is, and
yeah.
to send me your picture once a month at home, the comfort of your own home, therein lies an interesting integration between a home visualization tool and early screening.
Incredible. Wow. Um, just go on reimbursement because you've mentioned it a couple of times. Was there any challenges in understanding the right reimbursement strategy for you guys um as you mentioned earlier, coming from this sort of medical field, you're testing for oncology, but you're doing it through dental practices. Was there any sort of challenges there in the reimbursement strategy that the sort of two sides didn't necessarily meet, or was it still smooth? You were just able to pursue the strategy that you thought would be right.
We're not on market yet, right?
Yeah,
And so the final optimization, the final validation is ongoing. Um, and so we've had loose discussions with payers on how it would look and feel. We're working closely with McDermott Plus in Washington to come up with a strategy. The thesis that we had early days was this is a well understood testing methodology that's used for clinical oncology monitoring of disease, identification of disease from um, different types of solid organ cancers and blood-based cancers. And uh, payers, clinicians very well understand what next-gen sequencing is. They know that
yeah.
Illumina is the main player. So standardizing your chemistry onto Illumina, that de-risks the solutioning quite a bit and the ability to get payers interest in what you're doing. If you're coming up with completely new chemistry or completely new box or to evaluate a cell, or you're doing a different type of analysis that's not looking for DNA changes in your
Mm,
DNA, then it gets to be a little bit more challenging. But early days, we said, look, it's well understood. Let's figure out how that's going to get done. And everybody's gotten smarter along the way.
yeah.
CMS has gotten smarter, payers have gotten smarter. They're looking, if you're doing multi-panel tests, it's fairly well understood and price is assigned to that. Now, our job is to say this is the value of our test, but the framework for how to get it paid is largely already in the system. Now we just say this is our data that we cross, again, I'm not going to get in. It's not my specialty. This is crosswalking and moving things around. That's what we have really good teams of people to help us, advise us on. But we haven't run into a friction point at this stage. All the ICD-10 codes, which says, they look in the oral cavity. So we're using the same ones that they use for where's your oral cancer to justify whether you should go for a biopsy and histopathology right now. It's all the
Right.
same ICD-10 codes. We didn't need that. And so now it's a matter of just saying, well, instead of going straight to surgery, there's a test. Well, what's the test? What does it do? What are your proof points for that test? What's the clinical utility of that test? And that's the data that we're building up over the course of the next year after we launch. What's really interesting is that if there is a really good reason why you're going to want your own code, down the way, and we'll start that in 2026 as well. It's because payers want to understand how often your test is being consumed and
Yeah.
utilized. How is it, who, where? And the only way that they can do that is having a unique code for that. And so we do have to have a unique code for that piece of it by, and down the line, we'll start that process in earnest next year, but we don't need it right away to have clinically meaningful intervention for head and neck cancer patients and their care team.
Awesome. You mentioned you're launching Q1. Um, how is the business sort of set up to go to market, and what sort of levers have you pulled on to sort of try and get ahead as an early stage diagnostics company?
Yeah, we came up with again, as I talked with investors, they made it very clear, we'd love you to build your own wet lab, but the market doesn't want to give you the money to build your own wet lab. It's expensive. You need $1.5 million piece of equipment once a week. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So you start
Mm,
thinking about it like you're building a drug product. I need to find capacity in manufacturing center that knows how to handle this. And then what we did is we put that request, an RFP together, um, and sent it out to certain centers. Some of them had the machine, the machines that we were interested in, others didn't. And so we did a fairly laborious process to find a partner that we could work with at a scale that didn't that worked for them and it worked for us, at a price point that worked for them and it worked for us. And so what we have done is hired another CLIA laboratory in order to manage the wet lab part. And then we've got everything else wrapped around our patient portal and the final patient reported result. All the data lake, the bioinformatics, everything else is something that we maintain. And so we chose to do it in such a way that was more cash friendly, it was investor friendly. A lot of variable costs in the way we've structured our contracts was done thoughtfully with the new product. And I think
mm,
therein lies the reward that you're getting, is if you put those pieces together, you will get investment to move it to the next stage and give it an opportunity to get into market. And so for us, the technology wasn't the risk. The risk is, will dentists do this? We had the opportunity to talk with about 400 dentists. It was very clear 80% of them really were interested in having access to a molecular diagnostic test. They weren't scared. We need it. We're sick and tired of using our eyes, and we know our
sure.
eyes are failing us with the identification of cancerous lesions. We work closely with a large distributor, Henry Schein, who thought this is an interesting business segment to get into. Should we do it? And so they asked 15,000 of their clients, would you use a test along these lines? And they wound up getting the exact same number, 80%. And so we know the market wants it, but
Yeah.
will they really do it? This is where the psychology and behaviors of will they do it need to be proven out, and that's what we've been given the opportunity to do, is bring it into market, understand how, who, where is it going to be used for what types of applications, and learn from that and demonstrate to the market that there's this opportunity. And that's where a scale round would come in to further expand the market presence.
Mm. Um, and so these things are on the horizon. What are the sort of milestones that you have on the horizon for next year?
We want to have a handful of customers in the first quarter or two that are providing us real-time feedback on the utility of the assay in their practice, and have we thought of the best way of integrating it. And so this will happen on a limited release in a region or two of the country. Then the goal for the end of the year is to knock that up to about 20 to 30 clients across the country. And dentists operate largely in groups. They're called dental service organizations, and so they test out what a new technology. in a handful of them, and then they scale it to the rest of them over the course of the remainder of the year once they get some trust and confidence in what's going on. And so we just want to be able to demonstrate that we've taken pilots with a handful of their offices and then scale it. And then we can report back on how did that scaling work.
Mm.
Those are going to be the biggest metrics. And then we have the next metrics is how many people want access to it that are not in the region that we've picked out, but want to be the first ones available. And so we're going to keep, we anticipate a long list of demand for places we want to send the product, and we're just holding off before we've got everything kind of nailed down. We want to make sure that we had the first impression of us is the best impression possible.
Yeah. Um, 2026 is going to be a really exciting year for the company. A lot to look forward to, and the data coming back from that proof of concept, etc. Um, it should be a really exciting year. Harold, before I let you go, is there anything else you wanted to sort of touch on and sort of share with us?
I think we've come up with some really creative financing structures for ourselves. Really happy to share that we've worked closely with a group called CareQuest out of Boston. And CareQuest only happened because corporates came together. Corporates that typically don't invest off of their balance sheets or have a venture fund like Colgate, DentaQuest, Henry Schein, PDS Health. And so it was a group of very thoughtful oral health focused businesses that came up with a way of we need to do more to come up with medical and dental integration stories. And then they saw all these new technology companies developing, and they created a fund to invest out of. And I think it was a really clever approach for big companies to provide a mechanism for their teams to provide insight to smaller companies. And they did it not as kind of like one-on-one, but as a collection
Mm,
of companies that share the same business interests. And so it wasn't done, it was started as let's talk about dental medical integration as a nonprofit, and then it turned into something a little bit more. And I think therein lies what the opportunities may be needed in the future as capital constraints are all upon us. Corporates are getting thoughtful and not just having their own venture fund, but how do we partner up with other companies like us to share some of that early stage risk?
that's awesome. You have to think these ways in these times, right? It's not an easy landscape to be raising capital. So there is opportunities out there for the companies that can go and find it. But that sounds like a unique way to access an investment vehicle. That's awesome that that's been put together. Um, Harold, this has been fascinating, to be honest. The technology behind the science and also obviously the purpose around head and neck cancer is profound. Um, but I think one speaking to you and understanding the go-to-market strategy, not just about sales, but ultimately how you get it into patients' lives and make that as accessible and as easy as possible has been awesome to hear, because education, we hear, is such a big topic for companies that even when they've got a fully developed product and they just think, how can we now get this into the right hands and the right eyes. So thank you for sharing the story, Howard. It's absolutely awesome to hear.
Well, thank you for your time today, David.